and we decided, urban sports is definitely a fit for us. And also, we'd like to have a major event, a mega event, as we call them, eventually. So that's something that we're kind of working on right now and trying to.
Welcome to episode 150 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. As always, I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin, just a couple things to cover as always. First, if you haven't already, follow us at The Route Sports. If you see on the top hand corner on the video podcast here, that's our handle on all major platforms. And the reason I bring this up is because, unlike maybe other podcasts, one of the platforms that we're on is LinkedIn, right? So, considering the nature of the guests we're having and things we're discussing, I should say, you can either start your network, grow your network, maintain it, all by maybe following us at The Route Sports, where there's people going to be interacting with the page as well as our posts, and even just myself and the guests that come on. So it's a great way to kind of, use it as a tool for those looking to get involved a bit more in the sports business space, or even just kind of continue it a bit further. And then building with that as well, we're on all the other traditional platforms, whether it's Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc. On every platform, you can see when the episode drops and who's it with, and regarding, maybe some of the tidbits that you should look out for. And then as well, for those that have video on the platform, so basically all of them except LinkedIn, you can find clips for the episodes as well. So check us out there at The Route Sports. It's a great follow. And lastly, before we get into today's guest, if you haven't already, take the time to subscribe, follow, like, rate 5 stars on the podcast platform of your choice, as it allows the podcast just to grow a little bit easier. And then with that too, I mentioned we have the video podcast. That's on YouTube underneath the White Whale Marketing YouTube channel. So it's White Whale MKTG. And then we have the Route playlist there. We have the last 100 or so episodes that you can find via video. But if you're only on audio, no worries there. We're on all the major platforms. I believe it's 10 or so. And that's Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and wherever else you get your major podcasts. So take the time, follow, subscribe, whatever you need to do to allow the podcast to grow and make sure you're on up to date with what we're posting. But with that now said, and you having done that, we can get into today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone with experience at the Canadian Olympic Committee, Formula One's Canadian Grand Prix, and now as the manager of sports market at Montreal Tourism, Véronique Riopel. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were discussing before the podcast that we've talked a while ago. You've had a kid since we first messaged each other. So obviously, I'm excited to finally get into your route a bit further. So if you don't mind, as the podcast says, the route, do you mind maybe taking us, from the beginning, or maybe you went to school and how you got into the position you're in today?
Sure. This is funny because actually my route, is kind of going a separate way because I have a new job soon coming up, but that'll come later.
Sure.
In terms of my schooling, I am from the West Island of Montreal, so that's where I learned how to speak English. So I would say speaking English has helped me a lot in my route. I went to John Abbott College where I played varsity volleyball with them. And I actually worked also at the sports desk. So that's how it started. I actually, before that, I worked at sports camp with kids that specifically wanted to do a lot of sports. So I would say that all my jobs pretty much were in sports. So that's something to note. So I went to John Abbott College in social sciences commerce, and then after that I was looking into different schools, McGill and HEC, Université de Montréal. So and finally I decided to go with HEC, where I studied marketing. And while I was studying there, I got involved a lot at school. So I stopped playing volleyball at a varsity level, but I kept coaching at John Abbott. And I also was really involved, with commerce games. I think maybe you might have heard of this, but always the sports side. So yeah, that's what I did for school. And since then, I haven't done any extra schooling, but I always try to find ways to learn and also to be involved in smaller scale learning. So yeah, that's
Oh, that's fantastic. Good way to start. And funny enough, I think this might be the first or maybe even second time for the podcast. I actually went to CEGEP as well because I grew up in Gatineau. So I went
yeah.
to Heritage College and I did the same program. So I think that's kind of rare having someone on the podcast that also did that program in CEGEP. And I had a lot of friends go to John Abbott too.
Yeah,
And I
nice.
guess kind of building on that, knowing like Quebec, there's 3 years of high school. So it's a little faster than, let's say, the rest of Canada or even, let's say, in the States, right? Because then you just go to CEGEP or you can go straight to university. I think when I finished CEGEP, got into CEGEP, I was 16 and turning
Yeah.
17. So you're pretty young. And then I know I have some friends where they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go into social science, right? And I always knew I
Hmm.
wanted to get into business and I did the commerce program. But for yourself, did you ever have that moment of, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do this? Or did you always have an idea that you'll be within the business or sports space?
Um, I don't think, when you're 16, you're really ready to to take such big
Yeah.
decisions in your life. But I like the fact that, college or CJEP, you have a couple years to kind of see if you really like your program and
Mhm.
see, the choice that you make is kind of early. But then when you actually go to university, you can choose, what you really want to go into. So yeah, I think I followed, into my sister's footsteps because that's what she did. And, she was a year older and I like to, do whatever she did. And she played
Yeah.
volleyball too. So yeah, I was just kind of following to my sister's footsteps. And I know like maybe sciences wasn't necessarily for me. So I
Mhm.
figured commerce was, was good. And then marketing, kind of fit with my personality. But I didn't know in advance that I'd be working in sports and things like that. So yeah, I think, you just have to keep an open mind and see where life leads you. But yeah, so I didn't know necessarily, but I think it worked out in the end.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I know for myself, probably similar classes you were going through. And I remember I was maybe in an accounting class in CEGEP and I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm pretty good at this. I'll go into accounting because that's always good. And then once you
Yeah.
actually got to university and drilled down a bit or more so working in it, I was like, oh, I can't do this. So for yourself, right, you ended up going to school for marketing in university after CEGEP. You got involved, I think, dating back to John Abbott, where you're with the volleyball team, the sports desk, and these other opportunities as well. Did you always have an idea, in that post-secondary years that you're going to go into the sports marketing realm, or is it more so it just kind of happened, right, where your passion of sports just med with marketing kind of came together?
Yeah, good question. I think it kind of happened, to be honest. And then after a while, when I really decided that I wanted to go, in sports, whether that would be marketing or, any other field, I knew I wanted to be in sports. But
Mhm.
I think that's when I volunteered at the Vancouver Games. That's when I made, a choice to really step into that direction, and I knew that would open up a lot of doors for me. So yeah, I feel, really privileged that I had the chance to do that. One, because, the games were in my own country, and
Mhm.
also that I could take the time off to do so because my parents, were supporting me in that way and they wanted me to follow my dreams. So yeah, I feel really lucky to have been able to volunteer at the games. And I was actually in the mountains in Whistler, and I was, a media assistant or something like that. Didn't do much, but it was a lot of fun, and I learned, about how everything works, backstage. And after that, that's how I could. That's how I got my job at the COC. Was actually I was an intern before actually getting an actual job. So
Oh, okay, cool. And I guess from how that ended up working out, was it through maybe a connection you made while volunteering in Vancouver that someone you met there said, "Hey, we have this internship. I know you may have known this person, X person." Kind of always how it ends up working out, right? Where if you know the right people, ends up lining up well. Is that how that initial internship at the COC worked out for you?
um, I wouldn't say it was like a specific contact,
Okay.
but it was, just the fact of having that on my CV that opened up a door for me, to be honest. So yeah, so it's the fact that I went out there and had that on my CV, and then it just, out of all the CVs you probably received, then that kind of stood out. The fact that I had an interest in the Olympic movement, and that I took the time to go out there and volunteer. I think, that's how it starts. And it's kind of encouraging for people, that don't have contacts in sports, is that, you make your own contacts, and volunteering is actually one of the best ways to start, the wheel, because if you don't know anyone, then you can't,
Yeah.
make your network. So I would say, yeah, definitely volunteering opened up a lot of doors for me, and then after that, obviously, then the contacts came really handy.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And then I guess going from there, when you had that first role at that COC position, is that
Yeah.
something where, let's say it's that first quote unquote real job following an internship within the sports world? Did you ever have a moment when you're doing like, hey, this is for me, or maybe this wasn't for me, and then maybe you got reassured elsewhere? Or what was that initial role like for you that kind of led you down this path?
Actually, rewind back a little, and before that, when I came out of university, my first job was working for an agency, a marketing agency that was called Diobri, and
Okay.
they were specialized in sports. So that was also, something that, that confirmed my interest for the market. And my biggest client was Les Carabins Université de Montréal, which is the sports team for them. So yeah, so I think my job there really reassured me, and we did also strategic plans for that was like a second part of my job, but for Diobri we did strategic plans for different provincial sports federations. So I did like I think it's the 10 pin federation, which is bowling. Basically, we did their
Mhm.
strategic plan, and of I think tir à l'arc. What's that in English? I forget the name in English. Let me find it.
Yeah,
Tir à
no
l'arc.
problem.
Tir à
So I
l'arc.
guess once
Shooting.
you're yeah, no, that makes sense. And then I guess building on your time at the COC,
Yeah.
that's quite the let's say change of pace, let's say, right? Because now you're dealing with, let's say, the Olympic, these top Canadian athletes. What was that opportunity like? And then what did you maybe learn from that that made you realize, hey, like I'm gonna go further with this down the road?
Yeah, well, when I got the job at the COC, I was ecstatic. I was super happy because, well,
Hmm.
actually, it was the internship, right? And then they offered me the
Sure.
job, so that was really great. If you could prove yourself as an intern, I think people recognize that, and it's way easier for them to hire you once they already know you and you're already, kind of on the payroll. So yeah, so
Yeah.
the internship was really a good thing that happened, and I was working in marketing partnerships. Uh, right now, all the marketing part is actually in Toronto, and but
Hmm.
at the time we had different partners in Montreal. I think Burks and Air Canada, for example, were in Montreal, and yeah, so it was also in the marketing field, but I was open, to exploring different things. So I would make sure that the partners activated with the athletes and different events, and just make sure that the partnership was a win-win for both the COC and the partner. So that was really a great experience for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I'm sure that alone you have some stories working with the different athletes and making sure things kind of line up well from there. And I guess moving
Yeah.
on from there, just using your LinkedIn profile as my timeline to kind of go after, You were at the
Yeah.
COC, then you moved to Formula One for the Canadian Grand Prix. What
Yeah.
maybe enticed you to make that jump? Was it just that opportunity to potentially work on a property like that, or how did it come about as well?
Yeah, I think I wanted to see other opportunities, what would be available to me, and I think also the marketing was kind of moving to Toronto, so all of that being considered, and also
Mm.
my boss at the time had left, so I was kind of looking at my other opportunities, and this came up, so I decided to make the jump to Formula One, and I'm really happy that I did because there's so much learning to be done in that organization, that circuit, and it was before all of the hype surrounding the Drive to Survive
Mhm.
Netflix show. So it was just like at the period before that. So it was kind of, they were wondering what they would be doing to try to attract a younger crowd to
Hmm.
Formula One because, as before, I think before, all of the hype around that, it was kind of in a decline. So it was interesting to be part of that, marketing strategy to have younger people around. Like, for example, they only had, printed tickets, things like that.
Hmm.
So it's crazy to see how much it has evolved since then. It was only a year, pit stop, as I call it,
Yeah,
in my CV. So, and it was really interesting because, everyone wants to work with Formula One. So we did different exchanges for visibility in exchange for tickets and hospitality. So
hmm,
it was really fun working with all sorts of different medias and partners to kind of see how we could partner up for this event. So I did a lot of that, and ticketing also, and client service. And funny enough, one of the things that I did during that job was, how the grandstands are temporary at Grand Prix in
hmm.
Montreal, right? Because of the winter,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that, all the snow, they take everything down. So for a week, I had to count, all the grandstands to make sure that
Oh,
all the seats were there. Because imagine you
wow.
get to Grand Prix and like your seat isn't there.
Yeah,
So yeah, I did that for a week straight. So in sports, you got to be flexible. You got to be open to all other tasks connected. That was one of them. So yeah, you got to kind of be flexible to other things because yeah, sports is kind of a small world.
for sure. That's funny that you mentioned that because that's one of those, let's say, tasks that would come up within sports that, you would never really think of. It wouldn't be on the job description. But then when
Yeah.
you think about it, because all these stands are, temporary, somebody has to do that, right? Because as you mentioned, if someone gets there and they're like, hey, like, where's seat F11, right? And it's not there, that's an issue. And I know in June I was at the RBC Canadian Open for golf,
Yeah.
and they had these huge grandstands, and they're all temporary, right? Because they're on the golf course, and just oh man, the amount of counting. I'm sure that now that you mentioned it, somebody else probably had to do that there too, just to make sure everything was in place. But that's wild for sure. I guess building on that too, maybe jumping a bit ahead, and I don't want to go too far because I want to get there eventually.
Yeah.
The position you're in now probably has that unique, let's say, foresight or hindsight perspective that you worked at F1 or the Grand Prix in Canada before it kind of blew up, as
Hmm.
you're mentioning, with Drive to Survive. But then working in the position you're at now, I'm sure you still have a role to play within it. And then now you're seeing how much different it is over the years have changed, right? Where it's not the same thing where you're trying to figure out how to get these young people there, but now it's flooded, right? Where I know I was looking at a ticket for that, and it's crazy now compared to what it used to be. So,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think events, are a big driver in sports.
mhm.
It's kind of what we live for. I find in sports, and me especially, I love being involved in events. And at the COC, obviously, I was in charge of partnerships, but whenever there were games, you have to kind of put your responsibilities, your day to day aside to concentrate on games, and even have, different roles at games. For example, when I came back to the COC and I went to Sochi, then I was taking care of the family and friends. program. So
Hmm.
it was, different than what I would do. But yeah, so you gotta, be flexible in sports and be willing to do things that you're not accustomed to doing. So I think that was really, but that's what makes it fun. And being involved in events is just, the rush of being surrounded by people. And that's why the pandemic, was so difficult for sports because,
Yeah.
well, for everyone, but for sports specifically. And we were the first ones to come back too because you
Mhm.
can't do a virtual competition. so
Yeah.
so
No,
yeah.
for sure. I know for myself, I was working for a soccer team during the pandemic and just trying to engage with fans, especially during inaugural season. It was because they were playing in a bubble, let's say, right? So then how are you trying to make that engagement from there? It was super difficult. But yeah, I think as you mentioned there, right? You then went back to the COC. Was there a reasoning for that? Is it something kind of just wanted to explore further? Or, it just lined up well for you.
For sure. There was another position that opened up in the sports department, so it would be in Montreal.
Hmm.
So I applied to that, and like since they knew me and they had a good experience, then they decided to hire me again. But to be honest, Formula One was really amazing and great. But in terms of my personal values, they fit more, with the federated kind of sports side rather than the professional side. I think that's a personal choice that people can definitely make, and there's a lot to choose from when you want to work in sports. But for me, I preferred the federated kind of circuit with all the different sports, and not just being concentrated on a unique sport. So yeah, it was a combination of factors, including that as well, I would say.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess then building on that as well, you're touching on how you then went to Sochi as well, right? I
Yeah.
guess in your second stint at the COC. What was that like? Because you hear different stories, whether it's people playing, like hockey players playing in Russia or different things like that. Obviously, Sochi in the Olympics is a little different because I'm sure you're just focused on that Olympic village. But I'm sure nonetheless, it was quite the experience, right? To kind of go from working for the Canadian Olympic Committee where you're in Montreal to then traveling to Russia to kind of maintain those services there. So what was that experience like in going back for that second stint with the COC?
You know, think in your career there are moments that you remember, and I think Sochi was definitely one of those for me. I was located in the mountains, so I was kind of away from all the bustling of the city and all of that. It was a smaller village, but I definitely had a great experience, and I think for me it was a perfect fit in the mountain. It was first of all it was really beautiful, but and obviously there were some issue, like every time you go to an event there's always a surprise or always something going on during the game, so there's so many stories that can happen. But yeah, I think and so many things maybe, yeah, that that can happen that are out of your control, that you kind of need to concentrate on the things that you can control. And obviously it was yeah, it was really an amazing experience, and that's one of the reasons why I like to be involved in sports. That being said, it was really intense, and I think when I was 20 years old it was good, but now my job is more stable, and I think it fits more with my lifestyle right now. But I would say when you're young, then it's really the good time to take those opportunities where you're traveling a lot, where you're super intense at your job. And I would say definitely take those when you're younger.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And you just talking about the different stories. So at the end of each podcast, I have two questions I'd like to ask guests, and we're going to leave that to the end. But maybe there's going to
Yeah.
be a Sochi story that you can kind of share for us. And I guess then building on that too, when you kind of then go through your route, as you mentioned, you went back for a second stint at the COC. Well, then following that, that's when you kind of started your time with Montreal Tourism, correct?
Yes,
So
exactly.
how did that come about? What was that first role like? And then do you mind maybe sharing what it's like working for, let's say, a tourism for a city? Because I know we had someone from Ottawa Tourism,
Yeah.
and when you initially think about sports, right, you're always thinking about whether it's the Montreal Canadiens, the Senators, Maple Leafs, Blue Jays, etc. That's what people kind of think of. But then, as you mentioned, there's federated sports, there's the Olympic committees, all these different elements. But then there's also the
Yeah,
cities, right? I know when we
for
had the
sure.
person from the Ottawa Tourism, they were just talking about, hey, you're placing bids for these events, and they're actually the ones bringing it to the city. So there's a lot of background, work that needs to be done to actually even just have these events. So I was kind of curious if you can kind of touch on, maybe share a bit further what it's like working as someone within the sports market of one of those businesses or organizations, I should say.
So yeah, before I had no idea what that cities had this part. To be completely transparent, it's actually my
Mhm.
old boss at the COC that she was now working at Tourism Montreal, and she was looking to have someone on her team because she was by herself. So that's how that happened. She came to get me from the COC, and I was looking for something a little bit more stable. I mean, the job at the COC was, I was really happy there, and it was really amazing. But for me, I was looking to start a family and everything. So Tourism Montreal, I said, okay, I'll come to the interview, and everything went really well, and they hired me, and that's when I learned a lot about the industry, within cities trying to acquire events for to bring economic, prosperity to the city, as well as social development and the sports side, and also all the visibility linked to sports
Mm.
events. So yeah, so I discovered all, the different aspects of trying to obtain the rights to games, or championships, whether it's world championships or Canadian championships. And that's what's really interesting about my job presently, is that I get to work with all sorts of different sports federations that bring in people to the city. And yeah, whether it's speed skating, diving,
Mhm.
swimming, athletics, all these different sports that I get to work with, it's really amazing, because I think, if you want to work in sports, you need to have passion and drive,
Mhm.
because it's just the way people are that work in sports, and that's why I want to keep working in sports. People that work in sports are just amazing people, to be honest. Like I love that energy that people bring to the table, and that's why I want to keep working in sports, I think, for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And to be honest, as you're mentioning that, one of the things that kind of stand out to me is, and I regret not asking this in that previous podcast I had with the person from Ottawa Tourism, was when you're discussing how to obtain rights for these events or championships
Yeah.
and games, how does that work? Because you say you're like, okay, that's cool, but then obviously there must be a way, right, for all these different cities or even just events to kind of have that get seen by all these different potential cities and countries. So do you mind maybe explaining it for those that don't know how it works, how it kind of maybe functions on the back end of things, and how you actually bring these events to the cities that we live in?
Yeah, for sure. I think, a lot of people have heard of different, like, the really big bids that cities work with. For
Mhm.
example, for the Commonwealth Games, or for the FIFA World Cup, things like
Yes.
that. People, heard about that. So it's kind of depending on the scale of the event, then obviously the candidature, the candidacy is different to get the gains. But most of the time, and this can change from sport to sport, you have to also be adaptable to different federations, because everyone has a different way of working. And so first off, oftentimes the different federations or the rights holders, they will send out a request for proposals, or a letter of interest for cities that want to bid for different events. So that's kind of like the first step. And actually, um, if you guys want to have more details on the whole process of acquiring events, I wrote with my boss Andréane Paquette. We wrote together a document that tells you all the steps from A to Z to get event, specifically in Montreal. So I can share that with you and you can share that with the listeners after, so that they can,
Yeah.
really, if they want to know the whole process, they can go through that.
Yeah.
But basically, there's a national bid. So once, let's say we're bidding for a world championships, then Canada will say, the Canadian Federation will say, who wants to bid, and then everyone will send out a document with all the documents, saying, with all the information saying, why Montreal would be the best place to host this event, and the different hotels, are they free, how much different subventions they can get from different levels of government. That's, I think, the number one thing that people want to know. And
Hmm.
also, are the facilities, can they bring in events are they free, and is the pool up to norm, or the athletic facilities. So that's also one of the most important things to see. And then, yeah, after that, you do the international bid, and there can be visits, there can be all sorts of stuff, and getting all the partners also involved in Montreal. And more, we're starting to see a part that's about the festivalization of events.
Hmm.
So rights holders, they don't want to just have the sporting event, but they really want to have it, harmonious with the destination, and have things also for the people living there, for the whole legacy part. And
Yeah.
more, you can see in the trends that the legacy is very important in a bid, whether it's, what putting the infrastructure up to date after the event for people that live in the city, whether it's training sessions, whether it's training sessions for, people that want to learn, kids that want to learn about the sports, or whether it's having an actual show during the event to entertain people. So yeah, the legacy part is quite important. And then they choose the city, and then that's it. You celebrate, you pop the champagne, and everybody's happy. So yeah, that's like, but there's a lot of work in each step, I would say, and
Of
that's what's
course.
exciting about the whole bidding process.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I know probably last August, maybe a year ago to date, I went to the National Bank Open in Montreal, and I know my girlfriend and I were going through it. I don't know. When you think of Canada, you always think about hockey, maybe
Yeah,
some of the other sports as well. And you're like, okay, they have set infrastructure, right? The Bell Center, Canadian Tire Center, all that different good stuff there that have 41 matches a year, right, at home. And then when we went to the National Bank Open, you had this huge tennis stadium and all this different infrastructure, and then as well as, let's say, practice courts and like this little village as well for people to kind of engage with, have food, or try out different equipment and interact and engage with these partners. And you're like, oh wow, like wouldn't have expected this to be there, at least for my girlfriend, for tennis in Canada, right? Where
yeah,
it was really so impressive. So that makes a ton of sense. I guess then building on that as well, did your role end up changing? Because I know when you see here on LinkedIn, it says you're advisor of sports market to manager. Do you find there
yeah.
is a difference in that change, or is it more so just working on the same project and working on these different steps, but in regards to how you dealt with it was a bit different?
So when I was a advisor, I would say, I'd work on every file, but more of the, administrative stuff. And I
Mhm.
did, for this more the national side of things. Uh, but now as the manager, then it's my job is more related to bigger events, international events specifically, that have maybe a bigger budget, and that require also some sort of, more involvement with the different partners, because I'm sure you saw for the FIFA World Cup bid, for example, that Montreal well, we didn't decide to pull out, but the provincial government decided to pull out. So then the whole candidacy for the event, the whole bid, couldn't follow through because we absolutely needed their support in the file. So my job is a little bit more political in that sense, that you need to have, the different governments involved also in the bid process. It can't just be Tourism Montreal that says, hey, we want to bring into this event. So yeah, it's getting more and more intense in that sense. And yeah, we have, we're trying to concentrate in more the urban sports side. And as a city, one of the things that we don't just bid on every event, because we wouldn't have, the time or capacity to do so.
Yeah.
So we have actually it's called le Groupe des partenaires en événementiel stratégique de Montréal. So basically, it's a strategic group that is with the city of Montreal, ourselves, which is the tourism bureau. Sometimes they're together in certain cities. We're actually two separate entities. Then you have Parc Olympique, the Olympic Park, Parc Jean Drapeau, where there's a Formula One circuit on there, and a lot of different facilities also. There's Conseil du Sport de Montréal, which is the Sports Council of Montreal, and also the RSEQ, which is the side of education side of sports in Quebec. So all together, we kind of get together regularly, and we have a strategic plan that we put together as, a group to specifically see what kind of sports, we want to get into. What are the criteria that we use to evaluate different sporting events? Because, there's limited budget, limited time, limited everything. So you kind of have to target which ones makes more sense for the city. And we decided, urban sports is definitely a fit for us. And also, we'd like to have a major event, a mega event, as we call them, eventually. So that's something that we're kind of working on right now, and we're trying to get the new strategic plan out, because the first one that was done was before the pandemic. So as you know, a lot of things have changed since then.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess one of the things I forgot to mention earlier as well, for those interested in that document that you've created with your colleague that provides how to get, an event from A to Z. If you're interested, we'll create a clip, and then they can comment or DM us at The Route Sports, and we'll share it with them from there. And I guess then building on that as well, when you define a mega event, is that when you refer to something like a World Cup? Oh man, I'm just trying to think. Olympics.
It's more multi-sports, yeah. So World Cup for us is pretty standard. We have lots of World Cups, every year. I would say it's more of either the World Championships of a very big event, for example, FIFA, so for soccer, or a multi-sport event, as like for the games or Commonwealth Games, or there's a bunch of different ones. So we haven't positioned ourselves yet as to which one is the next one that we want to go for, but that's definitely something that once everyone's is aligned, then we'll definitely put that forward, because you need to have the buy-in of everyone, including the people that live in the city. So that's definitely something we're going to look at.
No, sounds very exciting. And I guess one of the things you kind of teased about earlier as well, this role that you're discussing that you shared so much about, you're actually then leaving it to kind of explore somewhere else. Do you mind maybe sharing what the next role is? And I know you mentioned as well that you wanted to maybe touch on it in case someone wants to then apply for this as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we're looking, right now we're looking for my replacement. So if there's anyone out there that is interested about hosting and bidding, then especially for an amazing city like Montreal, I think it would be a really interesting position to apply to. And if you have any questions, don't be shy to shoot me a message on LinkedIn. So yeah, we're looking for someone to replace me, because I'll be leaving at the end of the month. So the position is already up, and Chris, I think we'll be able to share that with everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely, we'll do. We'll either do a post or within the episode release, we'll do that too. And then is that something you're able to share what the next role is, or is that something you want to kind of keep under wraps too?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm going to be working for the National Sport Institute of Quebec. So there's different National Sport Institutes across the country, and I'll be working out of the Olympic Park. So yeah, I was kind of missing, working with people on the actual field of play, let's say, and having them close by, because right now is more, in the office and working with different partners at a higher level. Whereas now I'll be able, to every day see athletes coming in and out, and coaches and all the support teams for that. So I'll be in marketing and partnerships and business development. So basically, we as a entity, the Sport Institute receives some funding, some public funding. So my role would be to expand the private funding part for the company. So developing different services for different crowds, not just elite sporting people, but for maybe different people that are actually working in a 9 to 5 job, and see how we can cater to them, or develop different partnerships. So it's actually a new role that I'm really excited about, and to learn more about the National Sport Institute. I know a lot of stuff about it, but working for them, I'm sure I will learn much more, and I'll be able to tell you more about that once I'm a couple months in.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds very exciting. Good luck with the new role. And I guess with that, we're kind of touching about what's coming next. And that's kind of a good way
Hmm.
to maybe start wrapping up the podcast. I have two questions I like to ask every guest at the end of each episode. This is episode 150, so I've said this over 150 times now. I want to live until I'm 103 years old. I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the good times that I've been able to live during my career, right? So I want to put you in the same situation. You're 103, you're on a rocking chair, thinking about all the different things you've done in your career to date. Is there one story, maybe one in Sochi, or maybe at F1, or even now with Tourism Montreal? Is there one story that stands out to you that you know for a fact when you're 103, you're going to remember it and be, wow, I can't believe that's something that took place when I was working throughout my career?
And that I can share
Yeah.
out in public. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's tons of crazy stories when you're working in events, things that come up last minute. One Sochi. I think everyone likes to hear Sochi stories, so
Yeah.
I'll share one of those. So in Sochi, it was the Russians. They are very. They have a different culture, obviously, than us, and
Mhm.
they were really, really, really serious. Whereas I'm always smiling all the time. And
Mhm.
actually, when you smile a lot there, it kind of means you're kind of dumb. So they so they're like, I guess, all my smiling, but eventually, I warmed up, and one of the person that became, a buddy, it was my driver of the actual car, because I was in the mountains and I was taking care of the family and friends program. So sometimes I would have to go to the airport and welcome different family members to Sochi, and help them find their hotel and all that. And Sochi is actually, a very small city, and they really developed like crazy, and they
Yeah.
built everything from scratch. It was really, really funny in that way, because it wasn't like an established city. They built a lot for the event. And so they didn't necessarily have all the infrastructure around that to support all these new people coming in. So one of the things that was hard to get was a taxi from the airport to go to your hotel. So actually, all of Alex Bilodeau's family was coming in, and it was in the middle of the night, and their taxi was not there, their transpo wasn't there. So, and then I was like, how are we going to get his whole family home? And so I'm like, what are we going to do? And then I said, you know what? I spoke to my driver, and I'm like, can you do me a huge favor and bring Alex's family home, so, or to their hotel? And then he said, sure, all good, I'll do that. And so he took the whole family to their hotel, and I had to sleep in the airport, because then he couldn't come back to get me. So yeah, a couple things like that. But I was so happy, because then Alex did really well. So I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
it was worth it. It was worth it. So yeah, that's one funny story, is that during games or during events, you need to be ready for anything, and then including sleeping at the airport.
Yeah, no, no kidding. You should get credit for some of that success too, then. Uh, and I guess then the last question I have. So this one we went to 103. You know, you reminiscing on a potential story that kind of stands out to you. I want to go back in time. Maybe it's your first time walking on the John Abbott campus for the first time. Is there
Hmm.
one piece of advice that you've now learned that if you go back in time and talk to a 16-year-old version of yourself that like, hey, this is something I've learned that I think you should carry with you because it's given me a lot of, great things to think about, or maybe it's really stood out to me. Is there something that really kind of stands out to you that you value most, whether it doesn't need to be anything crazy. A lot of times people just say, oh, like smile more or whatever else, but is there something for you that kind of just stands out?
um I'd say, stay yourself, and don't try to be, anyone else. You can have, people that you look up to and that are inspirations, but in the end, you're with yourself 24/7. So I think the best way is to stay yourself, and I think that can be applied, in a lot of different, like in your whole life. It's just don't try to be someone else, follow your own route, and be confident that it'll lead you the right way, and that you'll be, if you do the small things right, then eventually, you'll get to the right spot. And just, be a nice person. I think that's important. It's
Yeah.
kind of evident.
That's that, that's funny you mentioned that, because I think 150 episodes, obviously that's great advice you say there, but usually when people are kind of saying, hey, do this or do that, and then at the very end they're like, also just be nice, because they're like, you'd be surprised how far that would go, or how many people sometimes forget about that. So I think that's
Yeah.
fantastic, and that's why I like asking that to kind of wrap up the podcast, because it puts a bow on it all and kind of ties it up nicely. So unless there's anything else you'd like to share, just want to thank you for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've touched upon it, during different the whole podcast. But yeah, so study in something that makes sense for you. And if you like sports, then there's a lot of different programs now that exist that didn't
Mhm.
exist back then, especially in Quebec with the Pôle
Yeah.
Sport HEC Montréal. Now that you can actually, study in sports, that's really fantastic. You also touched upon, networking is also really important. And I think, you don't need to necessarily fake networking. Some people see networking, oh, it's like a big word and people are kind of scared about it. But just, attend different events, introduce
Yeah.
yourself. You don't need to fake anything. Just be yourself, introduce yourself, be nice, and be present at different
Mhm.
opportunities that you have. And that includes, obviously volunteering and internship. If you can do that, that's
Yeah.
obviously something great. And you don't need to do, a whole week and going to games like I did. You can volunteer at local events
Mhm.
in your own city. um, Stay informed also, I would say. There's obviously, your podcast is awesome. There's a bunch of different, different social media um, things that you can follow that is really interesting. Read books.
Yeah.
And yeah, be ready, be flexible, and be persistent, because one day things will, as you gain experience, then you'll gain access to bigger roles. That be confident to bid for them. Often as a woman in sports, you're kind of shy to bid for roles that are maybe a bit out of your reach. But I would say, go for it. Even, if you're not 100% qualified, just try. Especially in the market
Yeah.
right now, it's kind of, it's, I think we have, the an advantage as an employee. So yeah, don't be scared to apply to different things. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that
No.
that wraps it up.
No, I think that's kind of perfect to share, right? Where just some of the things you're pointing out there just makes me think of my first networking experience, where I didn't really know what to do. If I'm going to be honest, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And
Yeah,
my dad told
yeah.
me, he's like, just go to the first person and start talking to them. And obviously, as you mentioned, if you're just yourself, eventually you'll connect with a certain group of people. Or even now, when I go on coffee chats or have these different meetings, or even let's say the podcast, some people you connect with
Mm-hmm.
more than others. And that's just part of it too. And obviously, I think as you're mentioning, one of the things I did learn at that first networking event, one of the people told me was always try to apply for roles that you can learn in, or that are almost like bigger than what you have
Yeah.
experience in, right? Then you can grow within it. Because then if you're overqualified and you know how to do everything super well, then you're just going to get stagnant and you're not going to continue to develop. So I think everything you're saying there is fantastic. And yeah, it was really great having you on the podcast. And yeah, all the
Chris,
best
you don't want to
in your
apply?
new. Yeah,
You
I'll
don't.
look into it. I'll look into it. I'm Montreal is not too far from me, but Ottawa is definitely something I like, and I know everyone always tries to push Toronto on me, and I don't think, at least right now, Toronto is not for me. It's not there, but yeah, who knows? We'll see. I'm open to different things.
Yeah, for sure. If you had to pick between Montreal and Toronto, I would say Montreal. Would be an
Yeah,
easy
yeah,
choice.
yeah.
Kudos
Okay,
to my
maybe
friends
you
in
should end the
Toronto.
podcast before people from Toronto, because that's all like Toronto people. But no, that's good stuff. Thank you for coming on, and that's it for episode 150.